What happens when a simple lemonade stand becomes the spark for change in a small town? Lena Montgomery, a young girl with a big heart, sets up a stand to raise money for charity, only to find herself at the center of a heated battle against the town's prejudiced police chief. But when her father, a former civil rights lawyer, steps in, everything changes. Will Lena's courage lead to justice, or will the forces of power silence her? Watch to find out how one stand for lemonade became a stand for justice. The sun hung low over the suburban town of Creekside, casting long golden shadows across the quiet streets. The day had been warm, the kind of spring afternoon that promised new beginnings, but it was the kind of warmth that would soon be overshadowed by an unexpected storm. In the heart of Creekside, on a quiet corner of Maple Street, Lena Montgomery was about to make a stand, though she didn't know yet how far-reaching her actions would be. Lena, 16 years old, with the dreams and determination of a young woman who had seen too much injustice, stood behind a simple folding table covered with a bright yellow cloth. A hand-painted sign proudly declared, "Lemonade for Charity, $1. Help support the Children's Hospital Fund." Her deep brown eyes sparkled with a mixture of purpose and hope as she poured a cup of lemonade, her thoughts consumed with one simple truth. This wasn't just a lemonade stand. It was the first step towards something bigger. Her passion wasn't driven by the need to make money or the desire for fame. No, it was driven by something far more powerful, the desire to help, to make a difference in the world around her. Lena had always been different from her classmates. While many of her peers were content with the typical teenage pursuits, weekends at the mall, school dances, sports, Lena's mind had long been preoccupied with a much weightier matter, the future. A future that involved medical school, a future that involved helping children in need, a future where she could make a real difference. The lemonade stand had started as a simple school project, a way to raise a few extra dollars for her community. But over the past few weeks, it had grown into something far more significant. As she stood behind the table, carefully measuring each cup of lemonade with precision, she couldn't help but think of the lives she might one day save. She knew that, for now, the money she raised might not change much, but the act itself, the effort to do something good, was the beginning of her journey. And that was enough. Despite her resolve, Lena couldn't help but feel a pang of loneliness. She glanced around at the neighborhood, noticing the familiar faces of her neighbors walking by, most of them too absorbed in their own lives to even glance at the sign. Some would pass by without a word, others would smile politely, but few would stop. It was an overwhelming feeling, knowing that the change she longed to create wouldn't come easily. But Lena was used to fighting for what she believed in. The world was full of people who dismissed her dreams, who doubted her ambitions, but this stand was her first real step in defying those expectations. As she arranged the cups, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Lena pulled it out and smiled when she saw the message from her father. "How's the stand going? Don't forget to drink some lemonade yourself." She couldn't help but laugh, a warm feeling bubbling up in her chest. Her father, John Montgomery, had always been her biggest supporter. He had raised her on his own after her mother passed away when Lena was just 10, and though he worked long hours as a contractor, he never failed to be there for her when she needed him. Lena respected him more than anyone. His strength, his quiet resolve, it had always been an anchor for her. But what she didn't know, what she didn't yet understand, was that his quiet life was built on more than just hard work and love for his daughter. There was a history he had kept hidden from her, a history that would soon come to light, and it would change everything. As Lena typed a quick response to her father, she looked up and saw a group of kids from school approaching. They were a mix of teenagers, chatting amongst themselves, laughing, and pushing each other playfully. Some of them she recognized from her biology class, others from the neighborhood. But there was one boy in particular, Derek Sanders, the star quarterback of the school's football team, who caught her attention. Derek had a reputation for being popular, charming, and just a little bit arrogant. He was the kind of person who never thought twice about throwing his weight around, and Lena had seen it firsthand. They stopped in front of her stand, Derek smirking as he eyed the sign. "Lemonade for charity, huh? That's cute," he said, crossing his arms over his chest. His friends snickered behind him, clearly amused. Lena met his gaze evenly. "It's for a good cause. You should try some," she said, her voice steady but her heart racing. "Yeah, right. A charity lemonade stand," Derek scoffed. "What's next? Bake sale for the homeless? Gotta admit, though, you're doing a good job pretending to care." He raised an eyebrow, challenging her, as if waiting for her to back down. The words hit Lena like a punch to the gut, but she refused to let him see her falter. "No," she said firmly. "I'm not pretending. People need help. What's wrong with that?" Derek's smirk faltered for a second, but he quickly recovered. "Whatever. Just don't expect to raise any real money." Actual charity work doesn't involve sitting on a corner selling drinks. Lena swallowed her frustration and smiled. Every little bit helps. You can buy a cup, or you can keep walking. It's up to you. The boys looked at each other, clearly taken aback by Lena's calm response. Derek seemed to expect her to back down, but she didn't. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. He glanced at his friends, then shrugged. Fine, he said, pulling a dollar bill from his pocket. I'll take one, but don't think you're changing anything. Lena handed him a cup, keeping her gaze steady, and watched as he walked away with his friends. A small sense of pride washed over her, but she knew that this was just the beginning. She had many more battles to face, and many more people to prove wrong. Just as the boys moved off, Lena heard the sound of a car pulling up to the curb. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw a police cruiser roll up slowly, the red and blue lights flashing, signaling trouble. Chief William Thompson, the head of the Creekside Police Department, stepped out of the vehicle. Thompson, a man in his mid-40s, with a stern face and the kind of authority that came from years of holding power in a small town, looked over at Lena with narrowed eyes. His gaze lingered on the lemonade stand for a moment before he walked over to her. "Excuse me, young lady?" Thompson's voice was low and firm. "Do you have a permit for this?" Lena blinked, taken aback. "I didn't know I needed a permit. It's for charity, sir. I'm raising money for the children's hospital," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves knotting in her stomach. Thompson's eyes hardened. "I don't care if you're raising money for the president. You need a permit to operate in this town. You're disturbing the peace." Lena felt her chest tighten. She wasn't sure what was happening, but she could feel the weight of his words, the clear challenge in his tone. "Sir, I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I'll pack up, but could you explain what I've done wrong?" The chief's gaze flicked to the small crowd that had gathered around, some of them watching with curiosity, others with concern. His expression soured. "I'll explain it down at the station," he said, his tone cold. Lena felt the sudden, overwhelming rush of panic, but she forced herself to stay calm. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, her phone buzzed again. It was a text from her dad. "Don't let them scare you, Lena. Remember, you're stronger than this." Her father's words rang in her ears, steadying her heart. She wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. But she couldn't shake the sinking feeling in her stomach. This wasn't just about lemonade. This was something bigger. And Lena, unknowingly, was about to set off a chain of events that would change everything. The sun had already begun its descent, casting an amber glow over the quiet suburban street of Creekside. The once bustling afternoon had now quieted into the warm, golden hour of the evening. Lena stood still, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. Chief William Thompson's words echoed in her head. "You need a permit to operate in this town. You're disturbing the peace." She had never expected it to come to this, a simple lemonade stand turning into a battle of wills with the town's authority. It was supposed to be easy. Set up a table, sell lemonade, raise some money for the hospital, and maybe even make a few friends along the way. Instead, she found herself standing face to face with a figure who seemed more like an embodiment of everything that stood in her way. Thompson's gaze was unwavering, like a hawk fixated on its prey. His uniform was crisp, his face set in a permanent frown that spoke of years spent dealing with the troubles of this town. The tone in his voice had been heavy with an authority that made Lena's heart race with uncertainty. She had faced bullies before, but this was different. This was an adult, someone in power. Someone who could take her stand away, make her the subject of ridicule, or worse. "What do you think you're doing, kid?" Thompson asked, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate the air. His eyes scanned the table in front of her, the yellow cloth, the neatly stacked cups, the modest sign. He didn't look at the lemonade, didn't care about the cause, didn't care about anything except enforcing the rules as he saw fit. "I'm raising money for the children's hospital," Lena replied, doing her best to keep her voice steady. She wasn't sure why, but something about this moment felt different than all the other times she'd been questioned. Maybe it was the way his posture towered over her, or the way the crowd had started to gather, some silently watching, others whispering amongst themselves. Thompson shook his head, a condescending smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. "And you think that's enough to get away with it?" he asked. "You're running a business here without a permit. That's illegal, kid. I'm going to need you to shut it down. Now." Lena's mind raced. She had no idea what to do. Her heart pounded in her chest, every beat echoing in her ears. She glanced at the growing crowd of onlookers, some now pulling out their phones, others crossing their arms, muttering about the audacity of it all. It felt like the whole town was watching her, waiting for her to make the wrong move, to back down. "I'm not doing anything wrong," Lena said firmly. but even she could hear the tremor in her voice. This isn't a business. It's for charity. It's just lemonade. For kids who need help. Her hands trembled as she held the pitcher of lemonade, and she struggled to keep the quiver from her voice. Please, I didn't mean to break any rules. Thompson's face twisted with contempt. Charity, huh? Well, that changes nothing. Without the proper paperwork, you're still violating the law? He reached for his radio, his fingers brushing against the metal as he prepared to call for backup. I'll have to take this further if you don't pack up. Lena's mind spun. This wasn't how she imagined her first act of activism going. She had thought that standing up for something good, something pure, would be enough. But here she was, a 16-year-old girl facing off with the law, on the verge of being arrested for selling lemonade. Her chest tightened as panic began to rise. She thought of her father, how he always told her to stay calm, to speak up for what was right. He had warned her many times that the world wasn't always fair, but she had never expected this. Not in her wildest dreams. Chief, please, she began, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. I'll pack up. Just let me explain. This is just for the kids, just a way to help out. Thompson looked at her with disdain. You're going to have to do more than explain, kid. I'm the one doing the explaining here. Now I need you to step back from the table. Lena's heart pounded in her ears as the words hit her like a slap. Step back from the table. No, she couldn't let him shut her down. This was her stand, her first step toward making a difference. And then, just as the tension was about to break into something much worse, a voice cut through the air, calm but firm. Is there a problem here, Chief? Lena turned her head, a rush of relief flooding through her when she saw John Montgomery, her father, walking toward her. His figure, tall and confident, immediately drew the attention of the crowd. The air seemed to shift as he approached, his calm demeanor exuding the strength and authority that only he could bring to any situation. Lena felt a wave of comfort wash over her. Her father was here. Nothing else mattered. Dad, Lena whispered under her breath, her eyes filling with tears of relief. She hadn't realized just how scared she was until this moment, when she saw him walking toward her with that same quiet confidence he had always carried. Thompson's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing at the sight of John. He clearly hadn't expected anyone else to intervene, let alone someone who wasn't afraid to speak up. He squared his shoulders as though preparing for a confrontation. This is a matter of law, Montgomery, Chief Thompson said, his voice sharp. Your daughter's selling lemonade without a permit. I'm just doing my job. John didn't flinch. Is that so? He asked, his voice calm but carrying an edge. Well, I'm sure you know the law better than I do. But I also know that people have the right to raise money for a cause, especially when it's for children in need. Thompson scowled, his eyes flicking to the crowd that had now gathered. She's violating regulations, Montgomery. I don't care about your opinions on charity. He turned back to Lena's father, his tone hardening. You're going to have to take your daughter and leave. Now. John stood still, his gaze unyielding. I don't think you understand, he said, his voice low and steady. My daughter is doing something good, something important, and I'm not going to let you bully her into silence. For a moment, the air seemed thick with tension, and Lena could feel her heart beating faster. The entire street was watching, the crowd now a silent, anxious witness to the standoff. Her father's words carried weight, but so did Thompson's authority. The moment stretched, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, with a deep, frustrated sigh, Thompson stepped back, his hand tightening on the radio. This isn't over, he muttered under his breath before he turned and walked toward his patrol car. John stood still, his eyes following the chief as he left. When Thompson's car finally disappeared around the corner, Lena felt the tension in her body release, the fear subsiding, replaced by a rush of emotion. Her father was here and they had won. But for how long? Dad, she started, her voice trembling with gratitude and uncertainty. Thank you, but why did he do that? I don't understand. John smiled softly, stepping toward her and pulling her into a hug. You don't have to understand it right now, Lena. But what you're doing, it's important. People will resist, people will try to silence you, but what you're doing right now is bigger than any law or rule. Lena hugged him tightly, the weight of the past few minutes finally sinking in. The fear had been real, but now she was filled with a sense of purpose. This wasn't just a lemonade stand. This was her stand, and she wasn't going to back down. The evening sky was slowly turning dark, the golden glow of the setting sun fading into the deep blues of night. The streets of Creekside, once busy with the chatter of neighbors and children playing, now felt eerily quiet. The echoes of the earlier confrontation still lingered in the air, thick with unresolved tension. Lena stood outside her house, the lemonade stand now deserted, but her mind was far from calm. The small victory against Chief Thompson had left her shaken, her hands still trembling as she wiped them on her jeans. She had done it, she had stood her ground. But at what cost? Her father, John Montgomery, stood beside her, his arms crossed as he stared out at the quiet street. The calmness in his demeanor, the quiet strength he carried, always seemed to steady Lena when the world felt like it was falling apart. Yet tonight, something in his posture felt different, more guarded, as if a storm was brewing just below the surface. "You did good, Lena," John said, his voice deep and steady. "You stood up for yourself. Not many people your age have the courage to do that." Lena nodded, her throat tight. "But why did he do that, Dad?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It was just a lemonade stand. He had no reason to treat me like that." John's gaze softened, his eyes darkening with something Lena couldn't quite place. People like Thompson, they don't always see the bigger picture. Sometimes it's not about what you're doing. It's about what it represents to them. And some people don't like change. They don't like being challenged. Lena looked up at her father, a flash of confusion crossing her face. "What do you mean? What do you think this means to him?" Her father hesitated for a moment, as if carefully choosing his words. He crouched down beside her, resting his hands on his knees. "Lena, there's something you don't know about me, about who I used to be." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had always known her father as a man of few words, someone who lived his life simply, without much attention. He was a contractor, unassuming, hard-working, and ever-present in her life. But there were gaps, things he didn't talk about, moments when he would go quiet, moments that felt like pieces of a puzzle missing. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice full of curiosity now. "What don't I know, Dad?" John took a deep breath, his eyes flickering away as if searching for the right words. Finally, he met her gaze. "I wasn't always a contractor, Lena. Before I moved here, I worked as a civil rights lawyer. I fought cases that challenged the system, cases that took me into the heart of political and social battles, the kind of battles that weren't always easy to fight. But I did it because I believed it was right." Lena's mind raced as she processed his words. Her father, a lawyer, a civil rights lawyer no less. She had never heard him speak about it. It felt like a lifetime ago, something completely removed from the man she knew. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked, her voice laced with surprise. "Why keep it a secret?" John's expression softened, his gaze far away for a moment, as though remembering another time, another life. "Because, Lena, I wanted to protect you. I knew the world wasn't always kind to people like us, and I thought, no, I hoped, that you would be safe here. In this small town, away from all that. But I see now that it's never really gone away. It's just hiding beneath the surface. And that's why you need to understand what happened today with Chief Thompson. What you faced wasn't just about a lemonade stand. It was about more than that." Lena felt a chill run through her as she processed her father's words. "But why? What does he have against me? Against us?" John sighed, standing up and walking a few steps, his hands shoved into his pockets. "People like Thompson. They don't like what's changing. They've held on to power for so long, and now, with more people of color coming into this town, it feels like it's slipping away from them. They fear what they can't control. And you, Lena, you represent that change. You're young, you're ambitious, and you're not afraid to fight for what's right. That scares them." Lena stood there in silence, the weight of her father's words sinking in. She had always known there were prejudices in the world, had felt it at times, especially when her mother had passed away and her father had to carry the burden of being both parents. But this was different. Chief Thompson wasn't just treating her unfairly because of the lemonade stand. It was something deeper, something personal. "I don't understand," she whispered, the confusion clear in her voice. "What do I do about it? How do I fight someone like him? Someone who has all the power?" John turned back toward her, his expression resolute. "You don't fight them in the way they expect you to. You don't let them dictate your worth. You keep doing what you're doing. You keep fighting for what's right. And you do it with your head held high. You've already started, Lena. What happened today, what you did, it's the first step." Lena's chest tightened as she listened to her father's words. She had always wanted to make a difference, but now she understood that the difference she sought wasn't just in helping others. It was in standing firm, even when it felt like the world was against her. "We'll figure this out, Lena," John said, his voice softer now. "But you have to promise me something. Promise me you'll never back down. no matter how hard it gets. Lena nodded, the determination that had been simmering inside her now flaring to life. I won't back down, Dad, I promise. Just then, the sound of a car engine broke through the quiet evening air, and both Lena and John turned to see a black SUV slowly driving up the street. It was a sleek, modern car, out of place for a neighborhood like theirs. The car came to a slow stop just in front of their house, and the driver's side window rolled down. A man in his early 40s, dressed in a dark suit, leaned out. Is this the Montgomery residence? He called out, his voice deep and formal. John raised an eyebrow, sensing something was off. Yes, it is. Can I help you? The man gave a slight nod, his eyes briefly scanning both of them before he continued. I'm James Bennett. I work with several advocacy groups that focus on racial justice and civil rights. I've heard about your situation with the police chief. I think you may have caught the attention of some people who can help. Lena felt her stomach twist with uncertainty. Who are you? How do you know about this? Bennett's gaze shifted toward John, who had remained silent, sizing him up. I know who you are, Mr. Montgomery. You may not remember me, but I've been following your work for years. You made a name for yourself in the civil rights community, and your work didn't go unnoticed. There are people out there who want to help you, help your daughter. Lena glanced at her father, who remained still, his expression unreadable. What do you mean, help us? She asked, her voice now tinged with suspicion. Bennett smiled slightly, as if he had expected her to ask that question. What happened today with Chief Thompson? It's bigger than you think. People are paying attention, and you, Lena, may be the key to something much larger than just this town. John stepped forward, his protective instincts kicking in. What are you getting at, Bennett? The man hesitated for a moment, as if weighing his words. I'm saying that this, what you're doing, it's more than just a lemonade stand. It's a movement. It could spark change in a way you never imagined. But to make it happen, we need to stand together. We need your help. Lena's heart raced again, but this time it was with something new. The thrill of a possibility she hadn't seen before. A new path was unfolding in front of her, one that would force her to confront not just the systems of injustice in her town, but the very systems that governed her life. The moonlight bathed Creekside in a cool glow as the night crept on. But inside the Montgomery household, there was an air of unease. The conversation with James Bennett still lingered in the air like a cloud, its implications heavy on Lena's mind. She stood by the window, watching the dark streets as if searching for the answer to a question she wasn't sure how to ask. Her father, John Montgomery, had remained quiet since Bennett's visit, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a tension Lena had never seen before. He had always been a man of few words, preferring action over talk, but tonight, even his silence spoke volumes. Lena turned from the window and walked over to the kitchen table where John was sitting, his face still set in that unreadable expression. Dad, she said quietly, sitting down across from him. Who is James Bennett, really? And why does he want to help us? John let out a long sigh, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the wood. His gaze was focused on something far beyond the kitchen table, as if lost in a memory. Finally, he looked up, meeting Lena's questioning eyes. You already know there's more to this town than what it appears, he said slowly, his voice heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Bennett isn't just some lawyer or activist, Lena. He's connected to movements, to organizations that have been working for years to address the same kinds of issues we're facing here. He's part of a larger effort, a fight against the kind of systemic injustice that's plagued communities like ours for generations. Lena's mind raced. She had always known that there was more to the world than what she saw in her small town, but hearing it from her father gave it an entirely new weight. She didn't fully understand what all of this meant, but she felt an undeniable pull toward it. But why us, Dad? Lena asked, her voice filled with a mix of confusion and hope. Why is this happening now? Why did they come to us? John leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Because, Lena, what you did today, it wasn't just about lemonade. It's about the power of standing up, of challenging the status quo. People like Thompson, they think they can get away with anything because no one questions them. But you, by simply setting up that stand, you force them to question themselves. And Bennett sees that. He knows that people like us, people willing to stand up for what's right, are exactly what this town and this country needs. Lena absorbed his words in silence, her thoughts swirling. The weight of what she had started today, something that had seemed so simple at first, now felt immense. A lemonade stand wasn't just a stand, it was a beacon, a call for change. But just as the conversation began to feel like it was sinking in, the sound of a knock on the door startled both of them. Lena's heart skipped a beat as she exchanged a glance with her father. He stood up, his face immediately hardening, and walked toward the door with cautious steps. Lena followed him, her curiosity piqued. Who could it be at this hour? When John opened the door, Lena saw a familiar face standing there, a figure she hadn't expected to see. Officer Rachel Carter, the younger, recently hired officer from the Creekside Police Department. Her uniform looked slightly rumpled, as if she had been working late, and her face was a mixture of apprehension and resolve. "Good evening, Mr. Montgomery, Lena," Rachel greeted them, her tone polite but firm. John's expression softened just a touch. "Officer Carter," he said, his voice cautious. "What brings you here?" Rachel hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Lena, then back to John. "I know this might seem strange, but I need to talk to you both. Can I come in?" Lena's heart raced. What could this be about? Was it about the incident earlier with Chief Thompson? Did they come to arrest her for what happened? She exchanged a quick glance with her father, who nodded, silently signaling that it was okay to let Rachel in. As Rachel entered the house, she looked around quickly, then turned to face both of them. She seemed out of place, standing awkwardly in their living room, a mixture of uncertainty and urgency in her eyes. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened today," Rachel began, her voice quiet but determined. "And I need to say this before it goes any further." Lena stood still, waiting for Rachel to continue. John, too, remained silent, his attention fully on the young officer. "I didn't agree with what Chief Thompson did," Rachel admitted, her voice breaking slightly with the weight of the confession. "I didn't agree with how he treated Lena, and I didn't agree with how he handled the whole situation." Lena's stomach flipped. She wasn't sure where this was going, but hearing an officer speak so candidly about her superior was both shocking and strangely reassuring. "I'm new here," Rachel continued, her eyes locking with Lena's, "and I've been trying to figure out where I stand with all of this. But what I saw today, it made me realize that I can't stay silent anymore." Rachel paused, gathering her thoughts. "I've seen it in the department, how people treat certain folks differently. I've heard the jokes, the comments. I know the way things are supposed to go. But I've been questioning it all. It's hard, to be in this uniform and feel like I'm part of a system that doesn't really care about fairness. But after seeing how Thompson acted today, I couldn't just sit back and pretend I didn't see it." John stood silently, absorbing her words, his expression unreadable. Lena was too stunned to speak. She had never expected someone in law enforcement to admit to the systemic issues that she had only begun to understand. I think what you're doing, Lena, is important, more than you probably realize," Rachel said, her voice gaining strength. "You stood up to something that's been wrong for so long, and I want to help you." Lena's heart pounded as the weight of Rachel's words sank in. Help her? An officer? Was it possible? Rachel continued, her voice soft but resolute. "I've been talking to some people who want to make a change here in Creekside, and I think you're the spark that could start it. You've already got people paying attention. I want to be part of that, to help bring change, even if it's just in small ways to start." Lena blinked, her mind racing. "Why would you help us? I mean, you're part of the system." Rachel nodded. "I know, Lena, I know it's hard to trust someone in my position, but I'm not like the others. I want to change things from the inside, and I believe you can help me do that. You've already started something big today. Now let's make it bigger." John, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, something that wasn't there before. "What exactly are you proposing, Officer Carter?" Rachel took a deep breath, meeting John's gaze. "I want to help you organize. I think if we get the right people together, community leaders, activists, even some folks from the police department who feel the same way we do, we can start pushing for real change. Not just for your daughter, but for the entire town. We need to show people that change is possible." The room was silent for a moment as Lena processed what Rachel was offering. It felt like a lifeline, something she had never expected to find within the very institution that had just tried to shut her down. She looked at her father, whose gaze softened as he met her eyes. John had always been cautious, careful, but now there was a flicker of something else. Hope. Finally, he spoke. "All right, we'll do it. But this has to be done right. We have to be careful, and we can't afford to trust just anyone." Rachel nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I understand, and I'll be with you every step of the way." As Lena stood there, taking in the words of this unlikely ally, she felt a surge of hope that she hadn't known she needed. Change was coming. And now it wasn't just her fighting for it. It was all of them, together. The following morning, a cold breeze swept through the town of Creekside, stirring the leaves on the trees in the quiet town square. The streets, once filled with the hustle of daily routines, felt tense. People whispered in hushed tones as they passed by, eyes flicking toward the corner where Lena Montgomery had set up her lemonade stand the day before. What had started as a simple gesture of goodwill had turned into a battleground, a public spectacle that no one in the small town could ignore. Lena stood at the edge of the square, her eyes fixed on the spot where she had stood the day before, a place that had now become a symbol of defiance. Her mind raced, the memory of Chief William Thompson's aggressive stance fresh in her thoughts. She had never expected things to escalate this quickly. She had never anticipated that her simple act of charity would ignite a firestorm. Her father, John Montgomery, stood beside her, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a quiet determination. The day had barely begun, but already the atmosphere felt charged with tension. News of yesterday's confrontation had spread like wildfire, and the town was divided. Some supported Lena's cause, rallying behind her, while others, including a significant portion of the local law enforcement, felt threatened by what they saw as a challenge to their authority. "Are you sure you want to do this, Lena?" John asked, his voice low but steady. "This could get ugly." Lena nodded, her hands clenched into fists by her sides. "I have to. I can't back down now." John glanced over at his daughter, his heart swelling with pride. She had always been strong, but today, she was more than just a teenager. She was a symbol of something greater. The injustices they had faced, the silent battles they had fought, all seemed to come crashing down in this moment. But Lena was ready. She wasn't just fighting for her right to sell lemonade, she was fighting for something much bigger, for the dignity and rights of everyone who had ever been overlooked, ignored, or silenced. "All right then," John said, taking a deep breath. "Let's go make sure this gets done right." As they arrived at the center of town, the scene before them was not what they had expected. A small crowd had gathered, murmuring among themselves. Some people stood by the lemonade stand in silent solidarity with Lena, while others watched with curiosity, uncertain of what would happen next. Among the onlookers were local journalists, their cameras trained on Lena's stand, eager to document what was unfolding in their town. Lena's eyes scanned the crowd, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt like she was standing at the edge of a precipice, a moment that could define her future and her father's. It was then that she saw him, Chief William Thompson, approaching with a purposeful stride. His jaw was set, his eyes narrowed in anger. The storm he had started the day before had only grown stronger, and now he was determined to finish it. "Lena Montgomery," Chief Thompson called out, his voice booming, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "You've had your fun, but this is over. You will be cited for operating without a permit, and I will personally press charges if you don't pack up right now." Lena's chest tightened, but she didn't back down. She straightened her back and met his gaze, refusing to show any sign of fear. Beside her, John stepped forward, his expression unreadable but firm. "I don't think you understand, Thompson," John said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of years of experience. "My daughter is not going anywhere." Thompson's face flushed red as he glared at John. "This is police business, Montgomery. Stay out of it." John's eyes never wavered. He knew this moment was coming. The power dynamics had shifted, and now it was time to reveal the truth, something that would change everything. "No, Thompson," John said calmly. "This isn't just police business. This is about civil rights, and you, as the chief of police, are violating my daughter's rights." The crowd fell silent, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. Thompson's eyes flashed with anger, but John didn't flinch. He had prepared for this moment his entire life, and now it was time to make sure the world saw what was truly happening. Lena stood beside her father, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always known her dad as a man who valued justice, but she had never understood the full extent of his past. Now, as she stood next to him, she realized how deeply he understood the very systems that were meant to protect people like her, and how those systems were being used to oppress them. "You don't get it, do you?" John continued, his voice unwavering. "I've fought for people's rights before, and I'm not going to let you take mine away now. My daughter's lemonade stand, in case you missed it, is a simple act of kindness. It's not a crime." Thompson's expression faltered for just a moment, but it was enough for the crowd to take notice. The shift in power was subtle, but undeniable. "You think you're above the law, Montgomery?" Thompson sneered. "You think just because you were some big-shot lawyer you can come in here and—" John cut him off, his voice sharp. "You don't know anything about me, Thompson. I don't have to be a lawyer anymore to know what's right and wrong. What you're doing is wrong, and if you think I'll stand by and let you bully my daughter, you're mistaken." The tension in the air was thick, and Lena could feel it in her chest. She had never seen her father speak like this, with such unshakable conviction. It was as though the quiet man she had known for so long had been replaced by someone entirely new, someone fierce and determined. For a moment, Chief Thompson said nothing, his jaw clenched, his fists at his sides. But then, the silence was broken by the sound of a phone buzzing. Officer Rachel Carter, who had been standing quietly in the back of the crowd, stepped forward, her phone in her hand. The camera had captured every moment, the confrontation, the defiance, the tension. Rachel had discreetly filmed the entire exchange, and now her phone was buzzing with the notification that the video had gone viral. The crowd around them began to murmur, whispers of approval rippling through the onlookers. Lena couldn't believe it. This wasn't just a local issue anymore. It was bigger, it was spreading, and it was exactly what her father had predicted. Rachel held up her phone, showing the video to John, who gave her a quick nod of approval. "It's out there," Rachel said quietly. "The whole town's seen it." John turned back to Thompson, who had now started to look uncomfortable, his posture faltering as the crowd began to voice their outrage. "You can't do this, Thompson," someone from the crowd shouted. "She's just a kid." "That's right," another voice chimed in. "You've got no right to treat her like this." Lena's heart swelled with a sense of unity and strength as more people began to speak out, their voices growing louder, more unified. The tide was turning. Thompson was no longer the imposing figure he had been just moments ago. The power he had wielded so easily seemed to slip away, bit by bit, as the crowd rallied behind Lena, her simple act of charity transforming into a symbol of resistance. Thompson stepped back, his eyes darting between the people around him, the growing crowd of supporters, and the unmistakable sound of camera phones snapping pictures. His authority, which had once been unchallenged, was crumbling. "You're making a mistake," Thompson muttered under his breath, his face pale. John stepped forward, his voice cutting through the crowd. "No, Thompson. You made the mistake when you tried to silence my daughter. And now, it's time to make things right." Thompson's face twisted in frustration, but the damage was done. His reputation had been shattered, and there was nothing he could do to undo the momentum that was now building in the town. In that moment, the power had shifted. The people of Creekside had chosen their side, and it was no longer with Chief Thompson. The air inside Creekside Town Hall was thick with anticipation. It was an evening meeting, but the room was already packed. Chairs were lined up tightly together in the old building, the walls echoing with murmurs of concern, outrage, and curiosity. The hum of the crowd filled the air, punctuated by the occasional cough or rustle of papers as the townspeople took their seats. For weeks, the town had been divided by the events surrounding Lena Montgomery's lemonade stand. Now, the storm was about to reach its peak. Lena stood at the back of the room, her heart racing. Her father, John Montgomery, stood beside her, his usually calm demeanor replaced by a quiet, controlled tension. He hadn't said much since the events of yesterday, but Lena could feel the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him. He had done what needed to be done, but she knew that revealing his identity as a former civil rights lawyer had set a dangerous course into motion. The mayor's office was under pressure from every side now, with the entire town watching, and Chief William Thompson's fate hanging in the balance. As Lena scanned the room, she saw the familiar faces of neighbors, some of whom had supported her from the start. Others, however, looked uneasy, perhaps fearful of what the revelation meant for the future of Creekside. The town, once small and quiet, was now divided between those who supported Lena and her stand for justice, and those who feared the ripple effects of standing up to authority. The town hall meeting began as the mayor, Robert Hayes, stood at the front of the room. His face was drawn, tired. He cleared his throat before addressing the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for gathering here tonight," he began, his voice strained. "We are here to discuss recent events regarding the Montgomery family, the actions of our police chief, and the future of this town. It's clear that these issues have sparked a divide in our community, and it's time we come together to find a way forward." Lena's stomach churned as she stood there. She had no idea what was going to happen next. After her father's public revelation as a former civil rights lawyer, there had been calls from all corners of Creekside for accountability. Thompson had become the villain in a story no one had anticipated. As the mayor continued to speak, she could feel the eyes of the room turn toward her father, their gaze heavy with judgment, curiosity, or maybe even fear. "We've heard the concerns from both sides of this issue," Mayor Hayes said, glancing toward the audience. "And we've conducted an internal investigation. The board has met to review the details of the situation. Chief Thompson, we have some questions regarding your actions yesterday, specifically the arrest of Lena Montgomery for operating a lemonade stand. We also have concerns about your conduct in the aftermath." The room fell silent. Lena's eyes flicked to her father, and she saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. He didn't look angry, but there was something else in his expression, a mixture of resolve and weariness. It was as though he had been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders for far too long. Thompson, who had been seated at the front of the room, now stood. His once proud, imposing figure seemed diminished, as though the weight of the situation was finally catching up to him. His face, typically flushed with authority, was pale, his eyes darting nervously as he glanced around the room. He took a deep breath before speaking, trying to regain some semblance of control. "I stand by my actions," Thompson said, his voice tinged with defensiveness. "I acted in accordance with the law. This wasn't about race or politics. It was about enforcing the rules of our town." The crowd's reaction was immediate. Some people muttered in agreement, while others scoffed. A few even shouted, "That's not true." The room was alive with voices, a mix of disbelief and anger. Lena felt the heat of the moment. The time for quiet compromise was over. Thompson's insistence on his innocence had only made matters worse. But John stepped forward, cutting through the noise. "With all due respect, Chief Thompson," he said, his voice calm but powerful, "the rules of this town should not be used as a weapon to oppress people, especially children. What you did wasn't just about the lemonade stand. You used your power to intimidate, to silence someone who was simply trying to do something good for the community. And I can't stand by and watch that happen." Thompson's face turned a shade darker. "I did what I thought was necessary to maintain order," he said, his tone rising. "This town is changing, and I'm trying to keep it safe." John's eyes locked with Thompson's, his voice growing firmer. "Keeping this town safe doesn't mean cracking down on a young girl for trying to help others. What you did wasn't just an overreach of your authority, it was an abuse of power. And as someone who spent years defending the rights of the people, I won't stand by while you try to silence my family." The room went silent, the weight of John's words settling over the crowd like a storm cloud. Thompson seemed taken aback. For the first time, he appeared uncertain, his bravado slipping. "You've crossed a line, Chief," John continued, his voice carrying across the room. "And now, we all have to face the consequences of those actions." Lena watched as Thompson's face flushed with anger and shame. He had always prided himself on being the authority figure in Creekside. Now that authority was crumbling, piece by piece. Mayor Hayes spoke again, his voice weary. "We've been in contact with the town council, and after careful consideration, we've come to a difficult decision. Chief Thompson, we regret to inform you that, effective immediately, you are being placed on administrative leave pending further investigation." The crowd erupted into applause. Some people cheered, others stood in stunned silence. For a moment, it seemed as if the room itself had come alive with energy, a sense of justice finally being served. Thompson's face went white. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He stood there, helpless, as his grip on power slipped away entirely. The mayor turned to the crowd. "We understand that this situation has raised many difficult questions, but tonight, we stand united in our belief that no one is above the law, not even the people who are supposed to protect us." Lena's heart pounded in her chest, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of relief. Thompson's resignation wasn't the end of the fight, but it was a small victory in a much larger battle. As the meeting drew to a close, people began to file out of the room, their conversations loud and animated. Some congratulated Lena and her father, others whispered among themselves, clearly unsure of what had just transpired. But one thing was clear: Thompson's reign in Creekside was over. John and Lena stood in the corner, watching the crowd disperse. There was a moment of quiet, a pause in the whirlwind of emotions that had surrounded them. John turned to his daughter, his voice low and thoughtful. "I never wanted this, Lena," he said, his tone heavy with meaning. "I never wanted you to be in the spotlight. But sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing. I've been fighting for justice for so long, but my first responsibility has always been to you. I did what I had to do to protect you. I hope you understand that." Lena nodded, her emotions a whirlwind. She understood, but she also understood something else now, what it truly meant to fight for what was right, even when it was difficult, even when it came with a price. She looked up at her father, the man who had taught her to stand up for herself, to always do the right thing, no matter the cost. "I understand, Dad," Lena said, her voice steady. "And I'm proud of you. But I'm proud of me too. I didn't know if I could do this, but I did. And I'm not stopping now. This is just the beginning." John smiled, a sense of pride in his eyes. "That's my girl," he said quietly. As they walked out of the town hall together, Lena felt a sense of weightlessness. The fight wasn't over, but today they had won. And with her father's courage and her own resolve, she knew that no matter what came next, she was ready. The days following Chief William Thompson's resignation had been filled with change, quiet, gradual, but undeniable. Creekside was waking up to a new reality, one that had been shaped by the courage of a young girl and the support of a community that had finally begun to listen. The months of silence, of suppressed frustrations, and of quiet compliance had been shattered. The walls that had once separated the police force from the citizens of the town were beginning to crack. And in the space between, the promise of something better was emerging. Weeks had passed since that pivotal night at the town hall. The investigation into Thompson had been swift, and the findings had shaken the very foundation of the town's law enforcement. Thompson's actions had been deemed a gross overreach, and as a result, the department had been forced to undergo a complete overhaul. Officer Rachel Carter, who had quietly stepped away from her colleagues during the initial confrontation, had taken it upon herself to lead the charge for reform. As the sun dipped below the horizon one crisp evening, Lena and her father stood side by side, looking out over the slowly transforming town. The streets, once filled with the noise of division, were quieter now, calmer, but more purposeful. It was as if the town had finally exhaled, ready to rebuild. Creekside Police Station had undergone significant changes. No longer was it a place of intimidation. It had become a place of outreach, connection, and community. Officer Rachel Carter had taken the lead, pushing for new community programs that were designed to foster understanding between law enforcement and the residents they were sworn to protect. Rachel's first initiative was a community policing outreach program where officers were encouraged to spend time in the neighborhoods they patrolled, engaging with local residents in non-enforcement situations. The program emphasized empathy, dialogue, and building mutual respect. Officer Carter knew that trust couldn't be forced. It had to be earned, one conversation at a time. "I never thought I'd see the day," Officer Malcolm Green, a younger officer who had opposed Thompson's actions from the start, said with a small smile as he leaned against the side of the police station. "But you did it, Rachel. You really did it." Rachel returned his smile, her face reflecting both pride and exhaustion. "It wasn't just me. It was all of us. The community, the officers who wanted to change, and of course Lena's lemonade stand. That was the spark." Together, they had brought a different kind of leadership to the police force, one that didn't thrive on fear or power, but on understanding and compassion. They had built something stronger than just a reformed department. They had begun the long process of healing the scars left by decades of division. And while there was still much to be done, Rachel believed that Creekside was finally on the path to becoming the town it had always claimed to be, a place of equality, safety, and justice for all its citizens. Lena, for her part, had found herself at the center of this transformation. No longer just the girl behind the lemonade stand, she had become a symbol of resistance, a voice for those who had been silenced for far too long. The attention she had gained from the local media after her stand, and her father's powerful speech at the town hall, had catapulted her into the public eye. But it wasn't the media attention that drove her. It was the drive to make a real difference, to ensure that the changes in Creekside weren't just temporary, but lasting. She had decided to channel her newfound platform into something tangible. With the support of Rachel Carter and her father, Lena began planning a community-wide charity event aimed at raising awareness about racial inequality and systemic issues, not just in Creekside, but across small towns nationwide. Her lemonade stand, once a simple symbol of youth and innocence, had become a rallying point for change. The event, dubbed Lemonade for Change, would bring together local businesses, schools, and activists to talk about systemic racism, economic disparities, and the ways communities could band together to create real, lasting change. It wasn't going to be easy, but Lena was determined. Her vision was clear: to raise awareness, create opportunities for dialogue, and show people that every small act of resistance mattered. As she sat in the living room with her father, mapping out the plans, she couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose, one that had been lacking in her life before. The weight of the world had shifted from her shoulders, and yet she felt lighter than ever. She was no longer just an observer of injustice. She was a part of the solution. "Dad," she said one evening, looking over her notes, "this event, it's going to mean something. I can feel it. But I need to know from you that we're doing the right thing. I need to know it's worth the fight." John looked over at her, his face softening as he studied her. He had always known she was capable of great things, but this was more than he had ever expected. You've always known what's right, Lena, he replied, his voice steady. You've taught me more than I ever thought I'd learn. The fight for justice isn't easy, it never has been. But your voice, it matters. What you're doing matters, and you've got the strength to see it through. Lena smiled, feeling a weight lifted. Thanks, Dad. I couldn't do this without you. As the days passed and preparations for Lemonade for Change took shape, the town of Creekside began to buzz with anticipation. Local businesses offered to donate food and beverages, schools pledged to volunteer, and even the local church stepped in to help with outreach. For the first time in a long while, the town felt unified, a collective force working toward a common goal. The day of the event arrived, and Creekside's town square was transformed. The streets were lined with tables and booths, all covered in yellow and white, the color of lemonade. Rachel Carter was there, speaking with residents, her presence one of calm assurance. Officer Green, now promoted to a leadership position within the department, worked alongside her, greeting people as they arrived. Lena stood behind her lemonade stand once again. Though this time it wasn't just her standing there. Her friends, her father, and even some of the town's most prominent leaders were helping. The event was more than just a fundraiser. It was a conversation, a space for people to come together, listen, and share their experiences. As the afternoon wore on, Lena was overwhelmed by the stories people shared with her. Residents spoke about their own experiences with racial profiling, about the struggles they faced in their day-to-day lives, about the moments they had felt powerless. But as Lena listened, she also heard hope, a shared belief that things could be different, that they were already changing. In the center of the square, the sounds of laughter and conversation filled the air. Children ran past the lemonade stands, their faces full of joy, while parents and neighbors huddled in small groups, talking about the future of Creekside. The air was electric with the promise of something new, something better. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, John and Lena stood together near the lemonade stand, watching the crowd that had gathered. It had been a long day, and both of them were exhausted, but there was something undeniably satisfying about seeing their town come together. You did it, Lena, John said, his voice filled with quiet pride. Lena smiled, her heart swelling with a sense of accomplishment. We did it, Dad. This is just the beginning. As they stood together, watching the people of Creekside, a question lingered in the air, a question that would not be easily answered. The fight for justice had begun, but how far could they go? How much more needed to be done to truly change the system? The crowd continued to mingle, oblivious to the question that now lingered in Lena's mind. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This was only the beginning of the journey. As the sun set over Creekside and the town began to heal, we're left to reflect on the power of standing up for what's right. Lena's journey reminds us that sometimes the smallest actions can lead to the biggest changes. But even with this victory, the fight for justice is far from over. So I want to leave you with a few questions. What does it truly take to create lasting change in our communities? Is it enough to stand up in moments of injustice? Or is there something more we need to do every day? If you were in Lena's shoes, how would you handle facing such resistance while trying to do something good? What would you have done differently, or what would you have done the same? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below and share your perspective, because as we know, every voice counts.